Frank Hopkins from the Portland House of Music and Events, and you're listening to Musicians on the Record. Hit it.
Hi, welcome to Musicians on the Record. I am David Ward. This is the show where we bring you the musician's story and stories from artists of the world of music. If you've ever thought about being a production manager, or what does a production manager even do, all the stuff behind the scenes of making the rock show go on before you get to the venue, this is the guy that does it. We're hanging out with Frank Hopkins from Portland House of Music in Portland, Maine. Welcome, Frank.
Glad to be here, David.
Absolutely.
Pleasure.
Yeah, glad to have you. So let's just start with, first thing is, what does a production manager do?
That is a great question. And it varies greatly depending on the day. I would love to know what a production manager does. Most days I rely on my phone to tell me, because I sorted the advance a week or so before, and I've done 17 shows since then, and I've forgotten everything. But responsible for day-to-day operations, as far as making sure a show is staffed, the gear is there, everybody that is with the tour or regional van or local bunch of cats walking in the door from down the street are happy and have, feel like it sounds good, they're lit well, and they've got everything they need to turn in a killer show. And then wrapping all the cables up and cleaning it up and putting it away at the end of the night.
So you're the guy who does that at the end of the night as well, right?
Mostly it's take it out of the truck, set up the show, put it back in the truck, clean up the stage for the next day. There's definitely a large amount of janitorial.
So the overtones. The band doesn't help with that, right? They just
it varies it tremendously on the show. And like my particular venue rides this wild thing of, we do everything from local shows that I've heard the phrase, what's a wedge, when I've been dialing up the stage, to some national many multi-Grammy winning acts. And so that varies from the guy walking in the door, plugging in and playing, kind of a club style show, to we've had bus and trailer tours here that are, we're a 350 cap venue, so we don't get too many truck shows, but they've got a full staff, they've got a lighting package, they've got their own consoles, their own sound gear. We've had people bring in their whole stage monitor and wedges and run their own system, essentially.
Is that like a night off for you? Or?
It is, and it is. So they're in my job varies from day to day, and yesterday's a great example. We had an awesome national act in here. They're named Talk, and you should check them out. Check them out. TAUK. Just ridiculous musicianship, great people to work with, and it was a long day. They got a lot of gear. They bring in their own console. Once I facilitated loading in, setting that up, making sure they have everything they need, which sometimes is many things at once. I also, being the production manager here, I also get to be the LD, the lighting director, the front of house system tech, the audio guy, and essentially a stagehand and loader, sort of. But once they're in the building, I ended up running lights for the show last night, and yeah, I got to enjoy the show more than if I was running lights and doing sound, and therefore mentally in a couple places at once.
So a production manager does a lot of different things behind the scenes to make the band look good.
Absolutely. It varies day to day. It varies venue to venue. This is my venue. We're in a very odd niche in that we try to punch our weight above our weight as far as the quality of show and the tier of show we're putting on in a small, intimate space. The production manager at a larger size venue, he's not going to be pushing cases. I do, because we're such a small room in operation, we really try to be overly, go above and beyond as far as I meet people at the vehicle they pull up in and say, this is your parking spot. And going back to my days as a touring musician, that makes a huge impression with people because not many clubs are like, smaller clubs are like that. But at a larger venue where there's a lot more moving parts and there's a lot more departments and there's a lot more necessity for those departments because they have a bigger size job to do, you might be in the office all day just answering emails and making sure that the various people on in your departments have what they need to do their gig. And here I just kind of do all the gigs.
So you're doing lighting, you're doing sound, you're doing loading in. Are you also booking acts?
No, and that's where I absolutely have to draw the line at no more jobs at this joint.
Enough, right?
Yeah. The owner and talent buyer, though, same kind of vibe. We're pretty. It's a very small team here, and the owner is the talent buyer. His name's Ken Bell, great dude. He definitely, I really agree with his vision for this place, as back to punching above our weight as far as getting really amazing tier acts in an intimate quality setting. But yeah, he books them and then he runs the house, the bar, and staffing, anything house related I do not deal with, and I never want to. So I've got enough going on with the stage is my world, and I know it. And
tell us about the Portland House of Music, the history of it. How did it get started?
History probably goes back to Kenny's old room, which was a 150 cap room, half the size, but really was kind of a basement rock club, and Kenny took it over and made it into the musicians' hangout, the musicians' living room, kind of a scene incubator, and place for people to play with other people they might not play with, and a place for guys that were touring to have a Monday night off gig and play with people they might not otherwise play with, and kind of the only way to make that cooler was to put it in a bigger space and then be able to bring in bigger acts, and lo and behold, now we're here and we're doing exactly that, and we've been doing so for 3.5 years, which most businesses are done after their first 1 or 2. So we feel good about the next few years anyway.
Yeah. Well, and you guys are booked 6 nights a week, 7?
Yeah, six or 7 in the summertime, and there's some lulls throughout the season where we might be 4 days a week or something. Through the holidays, we book up with events as well, like crazy, and that gets to be 7 days a week. Sometimes every once in a while we do 2 gigs a day, and we've got an event in the afternoon and something at night, or
that's got to be a challenge for you to load in, load out, then load in, load out again.
I mean, it isn't. I still work other rooms and freelance a good deal. So much of your job as a production manager is just being glued to Google Calendar. I don't know how people did it before Google Calendar. Every tech I know just has 30 different colors going on, and they're in, the business is certainly easier with that technology, but I don't know.
Yeah, because you're not only here at the
how we did it 10 years ago.
You're at the Portland House of Music. You're also at the State Theater in Portland, Maine, and Port City Music as well, right?
Yeah.
You're a busy guy.
And then freelance outdoors. Yeah, there's always festival work in the summertime, and tons of stuff. Everybody, the summer happens and everybody wants to party.
Sure.
So obviously you've been doing this for a while, but you also mentioned being a touring musician. You are a guitarist. Tell me a little bit about how you went from playing guitar, being on the road, to this. How did that transition happen?
I was actually when I was touring, I was playing keyboards. Psych.
I'm sorry. I thought I heard guitarist.
I am a guitarist as well.
You're a
and
multi-talented
played.
musician then. Yeah.
I have taken every gig I possibly could. What's the gig? Do you need a flute player? I'm going to learn the
Some Yaz flute there, right?
You want it, I'll pull it out.
I started in the studio, and that came from working on production on records, you kind of like, hey, this thing needs a zither part. Where can we get an old zither? How do I play the zither to make this part happen?
Is that right?
And so I've never considered myself a guitarist. I've never considered myself a piano player. But I will get the gig, and I'll be there on time, and I'll make the gig happen. So I was touring as a keys player for an indie rock band called Sea Peoples, and they're awesome, and you should check them out.
Check them out.
SEE Peoples, as is. A guy named Will Bradford is the leader of that. He writes amazing songs. The music is all over the map. It's a little bit Radiohead, a little bit Flaming Lips. It's a little bit of a lot of things mashed into an indie rock wall of sound.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was touring in that band, and Kenny was going to build this place, and I was definitely thinking about trying to work less, which didn't happen as a result of it, but I was getting married and wanted to be closer to home, and so kind of naturally fell in here. And I definitely, like we were talking about, I love production now. I don't miss playing. I love watching people that are really good at playing and helping facilitate that, and I feel more comfortable in that role these days. Another 5 years, who knows? Because the great thing about music is it's always evolving, and you're always learning, and you're always learning your relationship to it. So, yeah, it's funny. I'm starting to get the itch to play again and dip outside of production, but right now it's an itch. And
it could
3 years ago, I was like, get me out of playing. I'm just burnt and I need to do something else.
And who knows what it will be? It might be guitar, might be keys, might be xylophone, French horn, whatever the gig is, right?
I've still got that flute, so I might break that out.
There you go. What are some of the highlights, Frank, for you? You've been here 3.5 years, but you've been in music, doing this as a production manager. What does any nights come to mind of like that was a cool night?
A lot, and that is why I love this size room. It's there's something about 350 cap and this space and the team behind it that I've worked larger theaters. I've mixed in 600 cap rooms and 1,500 cap rooms and outdoors to a couple thousand people, and there's something about having enough room to move some air and make it an impacttive rock and roll show, but being right on top of the artist as well. That has made, I've gotten to mix Warren Haynes in this room on the stage. He walked in after a show he was doing at the outdoor venue and wanted to jam with some local cats and came in and sat in. The guy played for 45 minutes and never asked for a thing, which in my world means he was happy and he didn't need anything. And I consider that kind of, that's the gold standard. If somebody is just happy and having a good time and they don't need you, you're killing it in the production role. But man, last night was a great show. I go back to probably once every 2 weeks here. I have the kind of show that you walk out just, man, I'm lucky to be doing this. I'm lucky to be in this gig. And there are definitely waves of where, oh man, I'm working the janitorial aspect of, I'm getting tired of wrapping cables, man. My ears are getting beat up. And then you just, that very night, you have the next show is just killing, and discovering, being at this size room too, you also get the bands that are, they're just about to really break in a lot of markets. And so I've definitely discovered, I've walked in and thought, oh, this band seems cool. I caught a few seconds of the YouTube clip or whatever, and then sound check blows you away and you're a fan for life.
That's great.
There's a band I've worked with twice in this room called Dynamo out of Nashville. check them out. Dynamo is my favorite band in the world right now. They're amazing. They walked in. They're nice people. We got along. They started sound checking, and it was just jaw dropping. My jaw dropped, and it stayed there through the sound check, and it stayed there the entire show. And then they came back, and they had two of the most amazing singers I'd ever heard the first time they were in the room. They came back, they had a totally different singer, one guy, and he was the greatest singer I'd ever heard. So,
The flip side also, Frank, of what are some of the biggest challenges, not that you have to name names or any sort of nightmare shows, but what are the biggest challenges of your job?
Keeping the Google Calendar straight is I literally am every day just pore over the thing, and you're constantly, I have to be one of those people that my inbox is clean. Yep. Everything that comes in has to be answered immediately, or I will drop a ball. If that ball gets dropped, it won't show up for a month maybe, and then it's really going to show up. Yeah. And I mean, my biggest, there are like day-to-day gripes of, people don't read anymore, I find. Yeah, right. It's like people just assume so much, but I don't know if that's my job or everybody's job. I think that's a cultural American thing now.
Yeah, just check your Facebook and that's enough, right?
Yeah,
so, yeah, it's not enough.
People that try to do business over Facebook is, it's impossible to keep an advanced thread going with multiple details and multiple parties and be scrolling on Facebook through them. Sure. Yeah, that's my biggest gripe is people that. Yeah. But no, it really is. And that's a beautiful thing about live that I've come to appreciate. I came out of a studio rat kind of background, and I always hated live environment because to me it seemed so high pressure, and one mistake and everybody, and you've got 300 or 600 or 1,000 people that are looking at you and they know that you made a mistake. And but in the studio you're poring over finite details, sometimes weeks, months at a time, and when you have gripes, they're there maybe for months at a time. And they work into your workflow. And live it's like triage in the emergency room. You slap a Band-Aid on it and you get it stabilized. Right. And so if you have any gripes, they're gone the next day. They really the next day it's a whole new tour, or it's a whole new show, or it's something totally different, and you're slapping a Band-Aid on that. And the less part of it is finding a niche in this room where I don't have to slap too many Band-Aids, really. I say that as a holdover from my real club days where you're literally Band-Aiding things sometimes.
Duct tape on the
literally stop the bleeding.
Sure. But I love that analogy of the difference between live and studio is that emergency room kind of triage.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of pressure, but as I got into my 30s, I started gradually doing a little live sound work, and I was like, oh, this isn't awful, and you get paid that day. Wow, that was a revelation.
Don't have to fight so hard to get paid, right?
Yeah, exactly. And now I really thrive off that, and the great days stick with you. You remember the really great shows, and the gripes are gone the next day, essentially.
Couple more questions because I know we're getting near the time. For somebody, Frank, who is in the music business, playing musician or whatever, but is fascinated by, they want to get to where you are, want to be a production manager somewhere, whether it's a 350, 150, 2,000 seat. What advice would you give them?
Biggest advice is seek out locally the guys who are doing it. That can be, if you don't know anyone, literally walk into a venue and grab someone and say, who's the guy here? I'd love to shadow you, or And if it's a large enough venue, you aren't going to get to talk to them. They're too busy. But there's always, hit up the local union. Find a theater and just say, do you need somebody that can push boxes? And there are definitely the best way for me to get in was to start working as a stagehand. I did sound in clubs for a while, and that's one thing. You can be very young and have very little experience and find some stagehand work somewhere, and that just gets you around. It's not glamorous. But I still do it to remind myself not to be. We joke about white glove guys in the guys that don't touch boxes are the white glove guys, and but to get there, you really need to see the fundamentals of just how cables are wrapped and how people carry themselves on the gig, and there's a ton of jargon in theater, and in you got to be around that and soak it up for a while.
Must be a shorthand of language, communication as well.
Absolutely, and some, if you're really into a particular aspect, if you're really into lighting, the world is hungry for lighting guys, good lighting guys, and but that's a whole subset of jargon that us audio engineers hate and joke about, but I've had to learn in my role as a production manager. That's my path. There's definitely, there's a lot of schools. It's less when I really was young and like I want to be in the music industry, but that question was real in the 90s for me. I'm sure it was in the 80s and the 70s, and to me the best thing is to find somebody who's doing it and and talk with them personally.
Absolutely.
Now there is this whole subset of you absolutely can just go to school, get a degree, and make contacts in the like a traditional trade kind of, and I have friends that have done that and are working in amazing positions, and it's really worked for. I know there are a lot of people that go to school and it's like the top 2% of guys that are really come out of school and are crushing it in the industry and are really happy and fulfilled. There's a lot of people that go to school and end up with a very large bill, and I recommend finding somebody personally, because if you really have the main thing is to have the drive to want to do this and want to do nothing. I can't do anything else but be around music. That's how I've gotten this gig, is just my whole life not being able to do anything else, not wanting to do anything else. And
so having a mentor, somebody to show you the ropes, being an apprentice,
being around it too. I definitely the way to I exist in a relatively small market out there, but it's the way to get to overhear chatter about who's on what gig this weekend and who's sick and can't make the gig and really needs a guy. Everybody in this industry, I think, gets their first job totally unqualified for it, trial by fire. So and so got in a car wreck and we need a body to stuff at this console. Do you know how to use this console? No. Figure it out. Good luck. The show must go on. That's a tenet. So I've walked out of one gig in my entire career, and that's because my building was burning down.
That's a good reason, though.
And I kids that come in and shadow me now, I tell them that, you get to the gig, you answer emails, you don't be an asshole, and you're going to get all the work in the world. There will be 6 months or a year or however many years, depending on the market, of kind of taking the lowest gigs and pushing boxes and paying your dues, and then you start trimming away at what you want to do and honing in on it, and picking and choosing your gigs a little bit more and upping that quality of life.
Yeah, because it seems like it's two things of you got to learn the technical skills, but also just as important, sometimes more importantly, you got to be a good people person and relate to folks well, be a good hang, and that people want you around.
Yeah, right? So. The guys I know that do really well in the industry and are happy and set where they are, it's always a priority on the the hang side for the most part. And yeah, it's not that, to me, it's not that hard a gig. You turn the microphone up.
Right.
You know, if an artist is great, the older I get and the more I've done live sound, the more, if an artist is great and the system is tuned appropriately for the room, you turn it up. My EQs are flat these days. You don't have to work at it. If the artist is good and they're putting out a great tone, you're just reinforcing that in the room. And if you're working like crazy and you're doing a ton of stuff with the buttons and you're wiping sweat off, at this point in my life, I kind of slow down. I'm like, you know what? You shouldn't be sweating. It is what it is. Let it happen. The Band-Aid is on, move on, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. And then lastly, you mentioned freelance work, where if somebody wants to hire you for whatever, their gig, whatever it is, how can they find you and contact you to hire you?
They'd have to write me an email.
Okay.
Not on Facebook.
Not on Facebook. Okay.
That has changed for me a little bit. I freelance for a couple private sound companies in the area, so I don't do as much cold call sort of. When I owned a studio, most of probably half of it was through word of mouth and half was through cold calls or like degrees of word of mouth cold calls. And now I'm kind of booked. So, looking at this year, I already don't necessarily want more clients.
Right. Okay, so
but that depends on the budget too.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
It's always a game of what. Wait, what is the gig? That sounds interesting. Yeah, I guess I do less freelance in the sense that I'm working for 20 different people in a month, and
so then maybe last.
But it's more. I work for a sound company in town called Ocean, and they do a ton of events all over the place, ranging from smaller venues and clubs to large outdoor events, and that's kind of a loose, it's run by an old high school buddy of mine, and so it's kind of a loose, you've got some trouble spots next month was, you're going to be short some guys, I'll help you out that day, and then once the month is black with Google Calendar colors from the 4 venues and 2 private guys I work for, and I also own a small PA myself, and so I guess I'm a small sound company. Once the Google Calendar is black, it's black.
Your docket is full, man. Your docket is full. Is there any?
PortlandHouseOfMusicAndEvents.com. I can be reached at production@PortlandHouseOfMusicAndEvents, and it's worth a shot.
Absolutely. Is there any show here or the other places that you're working this year that you're going, I can't wait till they come to town, or I'm so psyched this guy or woman is coming to town?
Man, right now like I said, it goes in waves, and I feel like right now I'm recovering from the last couple months. We had some incredible shows. I am not at the point where I'm like, where I know what's coming in on the docket.
Got it.
Mostly I look at things and I'm like, that's going to be a good one. And not like it's going to blow my doors off, but those are always a surprise, I think. Like that band Dynamo, that just blew the doors off the barn. I'm still listening to their music a ton on repeat, but next week we've got, or in a couple weeks, we've got the Subdudes coming back, and I know they're a great show. They're a classic band that we're going to get a lot of people in here that are tremendously excited to see I hate to know at this point, but I know because we've done this show twice now, people are going to walk out of there, that's the best time I've ever heard them. They sounded so good, and so I know that'll be a great day, but there's a bunch of that on this. I'm lucky in this room that Kenny books great talent consistently, and so the gripes are low, and the days where I'm walking out with a smile or hi.
That's great. This has been fantastic, Frank. Beautiful house. Check out Portland House of Music. It's Frank Hopkins, production manager. Frank, thanks so much for being on Musicians on the Record.
Thank you, David.